Hello, everyone, and welcome to this INSEAD online faculty masterclass, highlighting the social and prosocial behavior, a research discussion. My name is Helen, and I'm here to facilitate today's event with Professor Zoe Kenius and Maria Wright, Assistant Director of the MBA in Meme Recruitment and Marketing. Before we begin, please kindly take a moment to view the information on the screen. Do note that you are automatically muted for the entire session. You can submit a question by clicking on the Q&A feature located at the central bottom of the Zoom window. We will answer your questions during the Q&A session. If you have any personal or specific questions, we invite you to send us an email after the session. Without further ado, I will now hand over to Maria to share with us on our degree program's offerings. Okay, Maria, over to you.
Thank you, Hélène, and welcome everyone. Happy New Year, happy Friday. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I think it would be wonderful to see where you're connecting from. You can type your city or country on the chat box. And while you do that, I am going to share my screen. So Hélène, I don't know if we have some people typing in, and if you could read.
Yes, so we have Italy, Oman, India, Portland, Oregon, Germany, Frankfurt, Porto in Portugal, Fontainebleau, Dubai, Bangalore, France, Belgium, Paris, Boston, Netherlands, Kuala Lumpur, China, Barcelona, Taipei, Singapore.
Great. So lots of you are getting up very early and staying up very late to listening to our session today, which I'm very excited to host with Hélène today. And I think some of you probably already know a lot about INSEAD, but for some of you, you may not be as familiar. So before I introduce our guest speaker today, I'd like to just spend, I promise, no more than 5 minutes just giving a quick overview about the school and the program. So INSEAD is a leading business school. It offers graduate programs. We've been around for more than 60 years. Our mission is really to bring cultures, people together and ideas, and to develop responsible leaders that can transform business and the world. And with that in mind, we have created different programs to fit different profiles. So I have a few here on the screen. So whether you are someone who just graduated from undergrad and you're looking to start your career, we have the MINT program. We're in our second class. Or whether you are, you've been a professional in finance and maybe now you're looking to develop your leadership skills because you aspire to have maybe a leadership role within your organization. So we have an array of programs to fit every different profile. In addition to that, we offer multiple non-degree programs in our executive education. Usually we have over 11,000 participants in those programs in addition to the degree programs. And we cannot do any of this without the support of our alumni, which is now over 60,000 alumni coming from around, I believe it's 175 different countries around the world. So I know they've been a great resource for the school, for current students, for other alumni. Whenever we do events, we always ask their support to share their student experience with us. So a little bit more in terms of where we are. We have 4 different locations. We are in Fontainebleau, which is right outside of Paris. And that's where my colleague Hélène is today. It was our first campus. And then we also in Singapore, in the Knowledge District, which is a great location to visit the city. Abu Dhabi in the Marine Islands, and then most recently in 2020, we opened the San Francisco Innovation Center, which is in the US. And then just to give you a little bit more detail on the programs, for those of you who are interested in our programs, these would be the degree programs. I just want to point out the executive master programs because they're modular. They are designed for working professionals. So this is where you'll be joining a global class that you're working remotely, but then you also have the opportunity to come on campus with your global class. And then the Masters in Management, the MEN program, and the MBA, who are full-time and programs, those are hosted in our campus, both in Fontainebleau, Singapore, and Abu Dhabi. So if you are someone who's interested in our programs, I definitely encourage you to check our website. We host a variety of programs, events where we invite students, alumni, and faculty to join us. So if you're interested, please check us out. We host over hundreds of events every year showcasing these programs. So I mentioned that we also showcase faculty, and today I'm very happy to introduce our guest speaker. She is a professor of organizational behavior, and she's also the chair for the department. She is the academic director for the INSEAD Gender Initiative, which absolutely encourage you to check out. Great research articles you can see and upcoming events. Her research areas are on gender, culture, ethnicity, resiliency, bolstering interventions, bias, reduction, motivation, and performance. She has taught MBA classes both at Kellogg School of Management in the US and at INSEAD. And currently she teaches primarily the executive programs that I just showed you a little while ago. Her teaching topics focus on leadership development, social issues at the intersection of business and society, and psychological research in applied business contexts. You can find her research has been published in multiple leading management and psychology journals, including the Journal of Applied Psychology, Organizational Behavior, and Human Decision Processes, and Psychological Science. She's typically in our Singapore campus, but today she's joining us from sunny Arizona. So please welcome Professor Zoe Kanias. Zoe, I'm going to stop sharing and over to you.
Thank you, Maria. And good morning to folks in the Americas. Good afternoon to everyone in Europe and Africa, and good evening to everyone back in my second home in Singapore, where I've been with INSEAD for almost 13 years. I have been with INSEAD. I feel like I grew up at INSEAD a little bit. I came as a young assistant professor, and now I am running the organizational behavior department. So it's really my home away from home there, although I am in the home where I grew up now, currently in Arizona, bringing my 7-year-old son to visit his grandparents. So today I am truly delighted to be able to share with you some research that is both close to my own heart and my own core interests, and also very much aligned with INSEAD's mission. So I'm particularly excited to share it with you today. We'll be talking about social support and prosocial behaviors. And if you could advance us to the first content slide, please, Helen, thank you. She's going to be helping me with the slides. So I share with you a couple of examples here of what I mean by prosocial behaviors. And prosocial behaviors can involve lots of different things that all serve a purpose of trying to help people beyond ourselves. So there are self-serving or selfish behaviors, and then there are prosocial behaviors that benefit others. And some examples of these prosocial behaviors include mentoring and sponsoring other people, something that is important for everyone, but we know particularly important for women and other members of underrepresented groups, to ensure that everyone is able to develop to their full capability and their full capacity. There are also diversity and well-being initiatives that are targeting inclusion of everyone within our workforces. And the well-being ones are really about ensuring that everyone is able to bring their best self to work. And many organizations are actively involved in these types of initiatives within them. And then there are also the broader societal interventions or initiatives. I put up the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals number 3 and number 5 here that are directly related to this, that are also aligned with INSEAD's Business as a Force for Good mission, which is something that is very important to us here. And we also have the Hoffman Global Institute for Business and Society that works very closely in alignment with the UN SDGs. And so if you're interested in these types of activities, I would also encourage you to look more into what we call HGIBS for short here, or the Hoffman Institute, on which there's lots of great information online. They have blogs and research and everything as well. The third pro-social behavior that I wanted to highlight that connects to my research as well is community service and societal benefit projects. So these are when people volunteer outside their organizations, or maybe they're involved in CSR or corporate social responsibility within their organizations. Those would both count under this category. And then finally, many individuals who are more advanced in their careers and want to give something back, you would have established very valuable abilities and competencies and can add a lot of value. Many people like to give back through nonprofit board contributions and being members of those boards to be able to help these nonprofit organizations who can't pay board members lots of money, but they really value the input and the guidance of their boards. So these are all ways that people can contribute pro-socially. Of course, there are more ways to contribute, but these are ones that are all quite relevant for our alumni here at INSEAD. So I highlight them for you here today. If we could go to the next slide, please. When we're thinking about what we know about pro-social behaviors, we have a true interest in what can motivate people to engage more in these. These are behaviors that are good for our businesses, they're good for our societies. How do we get people to do more of these things? And when you look at the research, there's actually a fair bit of research in the organizational sciences and also in the psychological and sociological sciences on this. And there are some work level factors that we know are good contributors to people engaging in these activities. For example, within organizations, giving employees autonomy, having task variety so they're not doing the same activity over and over and over again repetitively, but they're able to engage more diversely in activities, and also giving timely feedback have all been shown to help increase pro-social behaviors in organizations. And then having supervisors who are transformational, supportive, and grateful also leads people to engage in more pro-social behaviors. So we know a little bit about the work contexts that can help to promote pro-social behaviors. And then there's also been some mindset interventions that have been done. These are very brief interventions done in experimental ways that have short-term benefits on people's contribution to pro-social behaviors. And so this can, having grateful managers, a manager who expresses gratitude leads people to engage in more pro-social behavior immediately after. And also reflecting on recent experiences of giving. So both of these are related to sort of the giving and receiving aspect of interactions can lead to more immediate pro-social behavior engagement. And finally, the last one that I glossed over quickly is that there's also a lot of work showing that some people just tend to be more pro-socially motivated than others. Some people are more oriented that way than others. But we also know that these other factors contribute to people's engagement above and beyond those individual differences or just the variance from person to person. If we could go to the next slide, please. So the research that I'll share with you today is research that I did in collaboration with a postdoctoral scholar here at INSEAD. Her name is Chiara Trombini, and another organizational behavior professor, Winnie Jiang, who are both co-located with me on our Singapore campus. And the research that I want to share with you is trying to identify a more unifying motivation for prosocial behaviors that goes beyond the individual, the organizational, and the just the very quick interventions that can change behavior immediately. And what we were interested in is how people's relationships over time influence their prosocial behaviors. So it's not that you're born to be prosocial or not, but how do those relationships evolve throughout your life, and how do those relationships with others contribute or maybe even inhibit your contribution to prosocial behaviors. And we're interested in these, how they connect with sense of security. We're interested in the longer impact that these can potentially have. And we're also very interested in the context in which people do this. So if you have a strong relationship with family and friends outside of work, can that help inside work? If you have strong social support within your work teams, for example, with your peers that you work with on a work team, how can that contribute to your motivations to give back to the community within the organization, and then even beyond through those other activities like the volunteering outside the workplace and the nonprofit board contributions, those types of activities. And we were really interested in the extent to which the effects we might find would generalize across different, what we call, sometimes we social scientists make fancy words for things that are really quite simple. We say boundary conditions, but that basically means, would it be the same for, gender is one of the factors, do these things work the same for men and women? Does it work across different cultural contexts in the same way? Does it work differently for people who have different education levels, people who are at different levels of their career with different job seniority, and at different age or life stages as well? So the package of studies that I'll share with you today look across all of these potential boundary conditions to try to inform our thinking. And it's now time, I see we've got a great group of people on here, and Helen is going to help me with a little poll everywhere poll to get your input on the extent to which you think this relationship between receiving social support and contributing prosocially would be the same or different across these different factors. So which of these, I guess I put 6 of them there. Which of these do you think might change the relationship between receiving social support and contributing prosocially? Do you want to talk them through how to do this, Helen?
Sure, you'll just need to go on paulev.com/INSEADDP. You have it on the screen. So if you can go on your mobile or on your laptop, and then you'll be able to give your answer there. I'll try on my side. Yeah, it's working.
Okay, beautiful. We know what you think, Helen. So we've got somebody thinking culture, we've got cultural context, we've got life stage, we've got more cultural context, more life stage. A gender difference, yeah. People thinking different things, education. Looks like cultural context is still our strong winner in this race. Cultural context and life stage being the big ones. A little gender, okay. A little education. So as you're continuing to answer, I'm going to talk you through a little bit about what our research team thought, because we thought all of these could potentially be factors as well, which is why we looked at them. I won't tell you what we found quite yet, but I will tell you what we were thinking as we were planning this research. We were aligned with you in thinking that cultural context could be a big factor that shifts. And some of the reasons that we had for that are, first of all, that those of us who live and work and travel in many cultural contexts, we see the difference in relationships across these different contexts. The way that we connect with others, the strength of those connections, the importance of those connections. And also, there's this fascinating research that one of my own PhD advisors, I wasn't involved in this research actually, but she did that. Her name is Hee-Jung Kim at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And she has done this work showing that the quality, sort of the nature of the benefits of social support are different. And she's originally from Korea, now a professor in the United States, and has done research in both contexts. And she looked at the difference in how people benefit from social support in Korea versus in the United States. And what she finds across several different studies is that in the United States, folks tend to be more direct in their requests for social support, sort of talk to friends or family and say, I need your help. This is what's going on, and are very direct and explicit about desiring social support and sort of asking for it. And they want to hear direct suggestions, want to hear emotional supportive feedback. Oh, your problem is you're okay, you did the right thing, or here's a suggestion for what you could do in this challenging situation. Whereas in Korea, the nature, it's not that people don't benefit from social support and that people don't want it, but the quality of that social support that's most beneficial is more indirect or more broadly supportive. So they'll say, I just want to be with my family. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to hash through all of the details necessarily, but their presence and engaging in activities with them really helps me to feel better. And so I knew, I was aware of this research, and I thought this cultural context could really be an important factor because the experience of social support could be different across cultural contexts. With respect to gender education level, there is some work actually showing that people with higher education levels, not exactly the same, but people with higher income levels sometimes get a little greedier. Just a word of caution for those who are doing well financially, to make sure that we continue to give back to our societies. So we thought that could be a part of the story as well. And also there are different levels of resources. So it could go either way. It could be that people become more greedy, as this research by Paul Piff and others suggests. It could also be with respect to education that those who are more educated have more resources with which to give. So you are more skills that you can give back, maybe more free time, et cetera. And the age and life stage is another one that we thought about, to there being life stages where contributing within the family is maybe all folks can manage when there are young children, for example, and then starting to give back to broader society is something that folks might engage in a little bit more later middle age and getting into retirement level. So we thought the relationship between receiving social support and giving back with prosocial behaviors might be stronger as people get older, or sort of have a maybe very strong when folks are young, go down when they have young families, and then rise back up. The job seniority, again, it's more experience to be able to give back. And gender is another one that I'll talk about a little bit because this is an area of interest for me. There are a couple of things that make receiving social support and prosocial behavior interesting with respect to gender. So the first thing is that there is a bit of a stereotype that women are more prosocial than men. When I share some findings with you, we always control for gender in our studies. And in some of them, women give a little bit more, and in some of them, men do actually, depending on what type of prosocial behavior we're looking at. But we have this idea that women do, and maybe even should do more prosocially. And there's also some work showing that women tend to give more social support. So there's these two literatures that suggest that there could be differences the relationship stronger for women if women really are more relational in the way that some research suggests. But maybe the effect would be more beneficial for men if they are starting with a little bit more need on average for social support, potentially, right? These are all sort of working hypotheses when we were starting the research. So thank you for sharing your views on this. When we get to the Q&A, we can unpack a little bit more, but let's go back to the slides now. I'd like to share what we did and what we found. And I'll share with you three brief studies actually here. This slide just talks a little bit more about some of the benefits of social support, but we get the idea. Receiving social support can be beneficial. It is, but the way we think about social support across these studies and in the prior research is about having emotional, informational, instrumental, which is really practical support, and companionate support, which is company to do things. So these are all things that we think about in terms of social support. And there's lots of benefits of receiving social support of these types that has been documented in research before we started our research program, mostly related to people's own well-being, and also a little bit about, for example, not wanting to leave organizations. If you receive more social support within a workplace, more likely to stay, which is aligned with some other research about good corporate culture leading people to want to stay in their workplaces and having good bosses. So there's a line of research all consistent with that. And let's go ahead to the next slide to get into what we did in this research. I'll share with you three studies. I'll share them all relatively quickly so that we have plenty of time to answer your questions at the end. The first one is the one that's maybe the most exciting from this global question perspective. So many of you thought there would be cultural variance in the relationship between receiving social support and engaging in prosocial behavior. And this is one that we were really excited to try to investigate in this study, which involved responses to a large, this was an INSEAD alumni survey that we did in 2018. And almost 6,000 of our alumni answered this survey. And they were a little bit heavy in the younger alumni. More of them were likely to respond. And majority men. And it's interesting because in some ways, this sample represents our full population of alumni. So it was a little bit Europe heavy relative to how our students really are now. Our MBAs, for example, now are about 1/3 in Europe, from Europe, about 1/3 from Asia, and about 1/3 from all of the other continents on this great world, on this great earth. But we were a little bit more Europe heavy in this sample because our Europe campus is our first one. So our older alumni tend to be more European. Yeah, so that's a little bit about the profiles of the participants who responded. But one thing that's really important is that it's so diverse that it enabled us to look at some of these differences across culture and age and gender. And it also allows us to really see what's possible when people are in those really senior positions, because you might see that line there, about 32% of our respondents being in C-suite level positions. So there was a lot of quite established professionals responding here. And so we measured, this was a survey, we measured their receiving social support previously, and also the extent to which they had engaged in prosocial behaviors. And those prosocial behaviors in the study were mentoring and sponsoring other men and women, creating and contributing to diversity and well-being initiatives, creating and contributing to economic development and societal benefits in the countries where they were, or broader societal benefits, and serving on nonprofit boards. If you can advance us, please, now. So for those, it's been a while since you've taken a statistics class. Some of you may be very savvy with this, others not. I'll put this in language a little bit. This is our results slide. But what's really important to note here is that top line that I've highlighted in green. All of the other factors under there are what we call control variables to try to isolate or say this is really the true relationship between social support and these outcomes when you clean up or control for all of those other factors. And we see that there was the number of stars, the more stars, the stronger. 3 stars is like quite a strong and statistically reliable relationship between receiving social support and mentoring and sponsoring, engaging in those diversity practices, striving to develop societies economically and societally, and serving on nonprofit boards. So this is the first really robust set of findings there. And if you can advance to the next slide, please. This one I put in a little more simple visual because it gets a little too complicated when I do the nerdy statistics for most folks. But we tested the extent to which gender, culture, and those other interaction terms that we were talking about before moderated or changed the relationship between receiving social support and engaging in prosocial behaviors. And none of them was statistically reliable. So what that means is that the receiving social support in the ways that we measured it here and engaging in prosocial behaviors among these 5,500 research participants, our alumni, nothing really changed that relationship, which tells us that it's really a strong and reliable one across those potential boundary conditions, as we nerds say, but really just that you would see the same relationship wherever you go in the world and whoever you try to observe it with. I'm saying like really big brand statements now. To be very clear, though, there was something that's a little bit special about our alumni, and that is that our alumni are all what our colleague Linda Brim calls global cosmopolitans, at least to some extent. So these are people who are, on average, more educated and more economically advantaged than many people if you look at the whole world's population, right? So in the next 2 studies, we tried to work beyond that potential limitation of all being very educated to say, if I'm working within a country, would this work for my employees, even if they're not as educated as I am, for example? So if we can advance to the next slide, I'll start to share the next study. The second study, we used a very large publicly available data set. This is called the Wisconsin study. So it is a United States data set. We are still yet to study sort of on the ground with less educated folks outside the US. But in this study, there were a few things that we were very excited about. And the first one is that they tracked these individuals from the time they graduated from high school, or sort of secondary school, as you would call in many parts of the world, in 1957 until they were 72 years old. And they had them complete different survey questions across all of those time periods. It's a little bit less than half men in the data set that we looked at, but very close to 50-50 men and women. So we could really look carefully at that potential gender variance again. And they, as I mentioned before, this is sort of regular average American folks. So they were much less educated than our executive and master's level participants. So on average, they had 2 years of university education, or less than 2 years, just less than 2 years. And we measured at these different time points. We had data from 1992, 2004, and 2011. And we used their indicators of receiving emotional and informational social support. And so these questions asked things like, to what extent do you feel that you can share openly and honestly and receive support from people in emotional times of need? Very American definition of receiving social support, but it's one that is appropriate in this cultural context. So we use that as the predictor. And as the outcomes across the 2004 and 2011 time periods, we measured their volunteering contributions. So the extent to which they volunteered at community centers and were involved in neighborhood improvement and gave to charitable organizations. If we could advance to the next slide, please, for the results. So in this one, we see that the prosocial support in 1992 predicted the prosocial involvement in 2004 and 2011 with all of those control factors included in there. So controlling for individual differences or differences between people, we see really a strong difference. So again, this study shows it supports what we found in study 1 and also shows that these effects can be quite persistent over time. So if the social support people are receiving in 1992 is also predicting the extent to which they're contributing in 2004, that shows a long-term effect. The support they received at the same time also predicts. So it's sort of this adding up, and whenever you add whenever you add social support, you get more prosocial behavior is what this study is showing us. And those residuals from receiving earlier in life can also have long-term benefits. So we found this really exciting across both of those levels. And again, we did not see moderation or any difference in this relationship across gender or across education, which were really the ones that we could look at here since it was a culturally homogeneous sample. If we could go to the next slide, please. Just the image to show how these factors did not change. Oh, we also had their income, which was did not change the relationship, because what we might think people might need to have some minimal level of economic resources in order to contribute. Or maybe, again, according to some of the research showing people who have it harder might be giving more. So it could be either at the bottom or top of the economic distribution, but it did not change at all, actually. So quite a robust finding again. And I'll share with you one more study quickly, and then we'll get to questions. If we could advance to the next slide, please. Someone is saying in the Q&A, I just see that the screen is black. I don't know if we can check the tech behind the scenes, maybe. I'll keep moving though, since there are other folks here. So the final study was an experiment with Americans. We social scientists love to say it works with an intervention if we help people to think about a time when they were socially supported. Will that help them to contribute prosocially right away, consistent with some of this research that had been done before? And again, we had about half men and about half women in this one. We also had a little bit of ethnic and racial diversity. So we had enough respondents who were not white, this was in the United States, to be able to test for any differences along those lines as well. So we also did that in this study. And we looked at the extent to which sense of security and wanting to engage prosocially leads people to actually do it. If we could advance to the results slide. So here we see that the social support, so that top box that I've made in orange for you shows the effect of the experimental manipulation of receiving social support on their sense of security. And the bottom line with the green box around it, the light green box around it, highlights the extent to which that experimental intervention leads to prosocial motivation, leads to sense of security, which leads to prosocial motivation, which finally leads to both engaging in diversity and well-being enhancing practices, and also in economic development and social impact practices, which were our primary outcomes in this study. We didn't include nonprofit boards because not many of the people in this sample would not have the prior experience to be able to do that. So here we see, again, quite strong and statistically reliable effects. And if we could go to the next research slide, please. So this is a summary of the findings that we have across the studies with social support leading to prosocial behavior in that study 2 over a period of many years, and through the sense of security and prosocial motivation in the final study. And again, we have no evidence of boundary conditions with respect to culture, gender, age, education, et cetera, in these studies, which shows us that this is an effect that really generalizes very well. If we could go to the next slide, please. So I think about using these insights, and there are lots of ways that I find these insights important for the organizations that we work with. First, on a more individual level, we can, wherever we are in our careers, we can say, really engaging and caring for each other at work matters, right? It's not a waste of time to do a little something to help out someone at work, because by so doing, it can lead them to do more as well, what we sometimes colloquially call paying it forward. So there's that individual level consideration. And then we also can really think at an organizational level for those who are at more organizational decision-making levels in careers, thinking about mentorship and sponsorship programs, thinking about how do we help engage folks in our diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and other well-being initiatives. If we're trying to encourage more organizational citizenship behaviors, thinking about the extent to which people are receiving receiving social support can be very beneficial. And the same for corporate social responsibility, ESGs, and on within and beyond our organizations. So I'd love to just hear from you all very quickly before we get into the Q&A. We have another poll Ev set up. If you could link us there, thank you, Helen. If you wanted, you can just type in on this one. If you say, as I'm listening to this, there's something I definitely want to do when I go back to work today or on Monday, or something that you want to think about how to implement within your organization, just type it in. A few words quickly is great so that we can see your responses quickly. This should make a word cloud as you start to type in. This should be back at the same one as before, right, Helen?
Yeah, exactly the same one. So go on paulev.com/INSEADP and you'll be able to type in your answer. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Seeing some great answers coming in. Lovely to see. And as folks are sharing these, as they're going up, you can also start to type your questions into the Q&A, because we will be transitioning into the question and answer segment of our session in the next couple of minutes. Great insights that you all are sharing back. These are beautiful to be seeing. We love to see when people are able to take something that we talk about in a session and activate it right away within the workplace. Beautiful to see. Beautiful, beautiful. And I think everybody's focused on sharing these, which is great. I don't see questions coming in yet. So after you've typed in what you plan to do with your learnings from today, please do type into the Q&A as well if you have any questions. So I'll answer where did it go? Bao Chow's question first about if there's a correlation between being prosocial and receiving social support. I think what you're asking is, are we more likely to receive social support if we are prosocial? Sort of the reverse causality as we sometimes think about it. And I think it's really a brilliant question. There is one study I know of that looked at people anticipating getting sort of reciprocal benefits after giving benefits versus wanting to give to others with the intention of those other people sort of giving forward as well. And that study did not actually find a very strong effect of people giving to others with the intention of receiving back. Although, to the extent that this is what we would call a reciprocal cycle, so you give and then those people receive and they give more, it does make sense that building those relationships with the others in our immediate environment, right? So if I help you out, you're more likely to help me out in return as well, on average, right? Of course, there are always special people, but typically that does tend to work. Being more prosocial on a broad level and receiving social support, my hypothesis would be that if you are in an environment where people are engaging prosocially, so you're serving on a nonprofit board, for example, you're doing that with other people who are interested in contributing. So it does make sense that you would be in a context where you're around other people who are caring about the well-being of others. And so that could lead to also receiving some social support yourself from those people. So I think it's really a reasonable question, although there's not a lot of research directly addressing it. Other questions? Children. Ren Hirsch is asking about prosocial behaviors in children. And, there is work showing that childhood tendencies can sort of stay quite long-term. The folks who study that, I'm not an expert in the child psychology context, but I know some folks who work in that space and I read a little bit. And my sense is that there are some stable factors over time. We actually have another data set where we're looking at the extent to which people feel supported when they're 18 years old and how that leads to later in life prosocial behavior. And we have some preliminary evidence that it does. With respect to children, though, what I would imagine is that a cycle of relationships, sort of having supportive relationships, you giving and receiving socially at a young age, could have a virtuous cycle throughout life. So I think the hypothesis makes sense. But whenever I talk and think about sort of long-term stability, I always think about, but what about potential for intervention? So maybe someone was, someone who was a greedy child. If nothing intervenes on that, they'll probably continue to be a greedy adult. But there are ways that people can actively engage in reflection and striving to develop that can shift dramatically. And there are also life experiences that can shift those types of things. So there is an element of stability throughout people's lifetime typically, and there is also significant opportunity for development as adults, which I have to be honest, as an adult educator, if I thought things didn't matter at all in terms of what we learn and what we experience as adults, my job wouldn't make much sense. So we certainly believe and see a lot of evidence that people can develop along these lines. And Maria mentioned a few different programs. I teach on the Executive Masters in Change, and that's a program that many people come to when they want to be giving back more. They're at a career stage where they say, I really want to be doing more along these lines. It's a time of reflection and a time of planning for a next career stage. And we do sometimes see folks who are doing, who have maybe worked in finance, something like that, and say, like, I really want to be supporting other people's development as a primary ambition going forward, and can have that big career switch even sort of mid-career. Thank you, Helen, for sharing all of the PolEv results, and thank you to everyone who typed those in. It's I've been watching your responses, and they've been really beautiful. Maybe we can go back to the slide on questions now. And let's see, questions. Alan, political implications for prosocial behavior. Absolutely, you can do a good deed regardless of political leaning. Definitely, definitely. This is not something that is political in nature. Everyone can strive to support the people that are working on their team. Everyone can strive to be a good listener to others. Everyone can strive to help others to develop and to help others to learn and grow. It definitely is not a political type of ambition really at all. Although we do see some of the factors that fall in this broader category as tending to be a little bit more on the liberal end of the spectrum. It is not political, and everyone can do it for sure. So thank you for your question, Alan. Mo, I see at the top next. Mo Hayes asking about what kind of social support is more beneficial. So we actually have looked in one of our data sets, at least, about if there's some difference between different types of social support. And we don't find much evidence for that, to be honest, in our data set and the predicting of prosocial behavior. With that said, the broader literature on social support that I mentioned briefly in this presentation that looks at the well-being benefits of prosocial behavior, they're the type of social support tends to matter more. And it seems when I read the literature that it's about what's needed. So if I can't afford to do something because I'm so economically disadvantaged, a little bit of money will make a big difference for my engaging in healthy behaviors, for example, or for being able to do something that benefits myself or my family. So for some, particularly at very low levels of income, financial makes a big difference. As people get above a minimum threshold of being able to make ends meet, financial increases in finances don't tend to make a huge difference, to be honest. So more money is beneficial for happiness, for example, but not, being the top 5 percentile of income in your country versus the top 1 percentile doesn't make a big difference in terms of anything, actually. So the financial, just wanted to speak to that a little bit. And the emotional, again, we know from the other research that the type of emotional support really matters depending on the culture. So having receiving the culturally appropriate social support is what's most beneficial for people's emotional well-being, for sure. I think can we take maybe 2 more questions, Maria and Helen, you think? Yeah. Clemence Caron. I'm not sure where you're from, if I'm pronouncing your name right or not. Sorry about that. Influences prosocial behaviors, but could environment or culture impact the received social support and therefore also elite? So it's really interesting you ask this. In our alumni data set, we did not see main effects of culture and we actually looked at this in lots more ways. We looked by continent, we looked by economic development level, sort of the broad economic country level indicators. We looked by gender inequality index. We looked by lots of different country level factors, Romance languages versus, we looked in lots of different ways. And we did not find effects of differences within our alumni sample. Now, again, the caveat on that is that our alumni are not always the most representative of the cultures that they're coming from. They are the people who come to us as a global business school. So it is possible that very locally minded people within different cultural contexts, there might be some differences. And there are some religions, for example, some cultural contexts where giving outside the family unit, for example, are more culturally appropriate. Just popping to mind for me is the Islamic practice of donation during the big feast, right? So one of the things that people do is they make sure that they give to the broader community during that time period. And so I understand, I really appreciate the question. And I think of these being largely connected to religious practices, although they could also be broader cultural practices, but we don't see in our data any of those types of effects ourselves. Although I would not be so bold as to say they don't exist in the broader world. Let's see. Kriti is asking about giving social support and corporate house, getting involved. What else can we done to generate more social support in a country that don't have so much? Okay. So social support can be really on an individual level. It can be about connecting with friends and family in a meaningful way. So if you want to give social support as an individual, you really can. You can say, I want to be more supportive, and I will do that with my extended family. Maybe once a week, I will strive to help out a family member that I know has maybe now in times of COVID, this person feels at risk to go to the supermarket or to go to the grocery. And so I'll do their grocery shopping once a week. That's an act of social support in itself, right? So everyone can do this, certainly not culturally constrained in that way. And maybe one last question, and I want to make sure I get from someone we haven't heard from yet. So James, I'll just say quickly, we were primarily focusing on the receiving of social support and these engagement and pro-social behaviors in this study. But there is other work looking at other factors that are not as relational. So one of the studies that I went over quickly earlier, I can highlight here, is that people feeling grateful. It doesn't have to be about receiving social support. It can just be sort of the practice of writing a gratitude list and reflecting on the things that one is grateful for can lead people to be more pro-social after having done that reflection. So there are things beyond receiving social support that can increase this for sure. I'm really in a mindset of thinking about the relationships now because that's this body of work, but there are other ways to think about this. And I think last question I'll take will be from Ian, who asked, what are the incentives for organizations to support pro-social behavior? That's really interesting. You're asking about financial incentives to engage in pro-social behavior. Yeah, so this is really interesting. So if you're I'm guessing maybe you're working in an industry or in an organization that is more self-oriented and trying to figure out how would we apply this there. I would actually love for you to think about how to use the social support types of aspects. And it could be, I mean, it's an experiment. Try it out on a small scale and let us know, Ian. If you do a little something for someone, or you encourage everyone on your team to do a little something for someone else, and see what happens, right? Maybe ask everyone within your team to do something for someone else on that team. Randomly assign them to each help someone else out and see what happens there. I think the effects should generalize across industry. That's what we found in our data. So I don't have reason to think that it wouldn't work even in a more self-oriented context. Thank you for asking. And we are out of time. I'm going to pass to Maria for our closing comments.
Yes. Thank you very much, Zoe, for sharing these fascinating findings from your research. I love the idea as the new year starts that we all do a little something for each other and see what happens. I want to thank you for sharing your time with us today. I wish you safe travels back to Singapore. I want to thank my colleagues Elaine and Nitya for organizing the event. I also want to thank all of you for joining us today. Please stay connected. Check out our upcoming events if you're interested in any of our programs or upcoming webinars and master classes. I wish you well, Happy New Year, and have a great weekend, everyone. Stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.